The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. The weight of her M40A6 sniper rifle felt familiar against her shoulder, a comfort she had grown accustomed to during her 4 years with the Navy's Special Operations Command. Today marked her first official mission embedded with SEAL Team 6, and the knot in her stomach reminded her that proving herself among the elite warriors would be no easy task. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison crouched beside her position behind the weathered boulder, his weathered face scanning the valley below through high-powered binoculars. The intel had been clear. A high-value target was scheduled to meet with local Taliban commanders in the village of Karabad, nestled in the valley like a cluster of mud-brick jewels against the harsh landscape. What the intelligence reports hadn't mentioned was the spider web of enemy positions that seemed to materialize from the mountain itself. "Santos, what's your count?" Morrison's voice carried the weight of years spent in similar situations, but there was something different in his tone today. A tension that made Maria's trigger finger twitch against the safety of her weapon. She swept her scope methodically across the ridgelines, her trained eye picking out the subtle signs that separated natural rock formations from carefully constructed sniper nests. A glint of metal here, the unnatural symmetry of stacked stones there, the barely visible outline of a rifle barrel protruding from what should have been empty space. "Sir, I'm seeing at least 12 confirmed positions," Maria whispered into her throat microphone, her voice steady despite the growing realization of what they were walking into. "Maybe more. They've got us in a crossfire pattern that covers every approach to the village." The other members of the six-man team shifted positions slightly, their movements betraying the first hints of unease. Petty Officer Rodriguez, the team's demolitions expert, caught Maria's eye and made a subtle hand gesture that roughly translated to "we're in deep trouble." She had worked with Rodriguez during training exercises, and his ability to read tactical situations was legendary among the special operations community. Morrison lowered his binoculars and turned to face his team, his expression grim. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than they had been that morning, aged by the weight of command and the impossible decisions that came with it. "Command says the target is critical. High enough priority that we proceed regardless of opposition strength." Maria felt her heart rate increase as she processed the implications of Morrison's words. In her experience, missions that proceeded regardless of opposition strength had a tendency to become monuments to tactical disasters rather than operational successes. She had studied enough military history to know that superior firepower meant nothing when you were surrounded and outgunned by an enemy that knew the terrain better than you knew your own backyard. "With respect, sir," she said carefully, knowing that challenging a superior officer during her first mission with the team could end her career before it really began. "Those aren't just random positions up there. Whoever planned this defense knew we were coming. They've had time to prepare, and they've used it well." The silence that followed her observation stretched long enough for Maria to count her own heartbeats. The other team members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their own assessment of the situation, but military discipline kept them from voicing agreement with the new team member who was already questioning orders. Morrison studied the valley once more through his binoculars, his jaw working silently as he weighed options that all seemed to lead to the same dangerous conclusion. The mission parameters were clear, but the tactical reality on the ground was painting a very different picture than what the intelligence briefing had suggested. "Santos, how confident are you in those counts?" Morrison asked finally, his voice carrying the weight of a man who was about to make a decision that would affect 6 lives and potentially the success of a larger operation. Maria took another careful sweep with her scope, this time focusing on the areas where enemy snipers would have the best fields of fire. What she saw made her stomach clench with professional dread. The Taliban fighters hadn't just positioned themselves randomly. They had created overlapping zones of fire that would turn the valley floor into a killing field the moment the SEAL team moved from their current position. "Very confident, sir," she replied, her training keeping her voice level even as her mind raced through tactical scenarios. "And that's just what I can see from this angle. There are probably more positions hidden in the dead ground where my line of sight doesn't reach." The radio crackled to life with an encrypted transmission from command, reminding the team that their window of opportunity was narrowing. The high-value target would only be in the village for another 2 hours, and extraction helicopters were already repositioning for the planned pickup time. Morrison's response to command was terse and professional, but Maria could hear the frustration underlying his words. She had been in enough high-stakes situations to recognize the sound of a man being asked to accomplish the impossible with inadequate resources and incomplete information. As the team prepared to move forward despite the overwhelming odds, Maria made a silent promise to herself. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to earn her place among the special operations community to let her first mission become her last. If the Taliban fighters wanted a fight, she would give them one they wouldn't forget. The weight of her rifle seemed to increase as she prepared to follow Morrison's lead down into the valley, but the familiar feel of the weapon in her hands reminded her of countless hours spent perfecting her marksmanship skills. Today, those skills would be tested against an enemy that had every advantage except one. They didn't know that Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had never missed a shot that mattered. The descent into the valley began at precisely 0800 hours, with Morrison leading the team along a route that hugged the natural contours of the mountainside. Maria took her position as rear guard, her scope constantly sweeping the high ground they were leaving behind. The Taliban fighters had shown remarkable patience so far, allowing the SEAL team to move deeper into what was obviously a carefully prepared trap. Every step down the treacherous path brought them closer to the effective range of the enemy sniper positions. Maria's training had taught her to calculate these things automatically, and the mathematics of their situation grew more desperate with each meter they descended. At their current rate of movement, they would be within easy rifle range of at least 8 confirmed sniper positions within the next 10 minutes. The village of Karabad spread out below them like a map from a tactical planning session, its narrow streets and flat-roofed buildings offering dozens of potential hiding places for their target. Smoke from cooking fires drifted upward in the still morning air, creating a haze that would complicate long-range shooting but provide excellent concealment for anyone moving through the settlement. Hold position. Morrison's voice crackled through their communications system as the team reached a cluster of rocks that offered temporary concealment. Santos, I need you to get eyes on the target building. Rodriguez, prep charges for emergency extraction if this goes sideways. Maria adjusted her position to get a clear line of sight on the building where intelligence suggested their high-value target was conducting his meeting. Through her scope, she could see movement in the windows of the 2-story structure, but identifying specific individuals at this range would require getting significantly closer to the village. That was when she heard it, the subtle whisper of voices carried on the mountain wind. The Taliban snipers were talking to each other, their communications discipline apparently relaxed by the confidence that came with overwhelming tactical superiority. Maria's Arabic was functional rather than fluent, but she caught enough words to understand that they were coordinating their fields of fire. Too many snipers here. One voice drifted across the rocks, followed by what sounded like laughter from multiple positions. The enemy fighters were so confident in their trap that they weren't even bothering to maintain proper noise discipline. Maria felt a cold anger building in her chest as she realized the full extent of what they were facing. The Taliban hadn't just prepared an ambush, they had turned it into entertainment. The enemy snipers were treating the approaching SEAL team like targets in a shooting gallery, confident that the Americans would walk directly into their crosshairs without realizing the danger until it was too late. Sir, Maria whispered into her throat microphone, they know we're coming. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Morrison's response was immediate and decisive. All units, hold position. Santos, can you get a count on how many we're actually dealing with? The next few minutes stretched like hours as Maria methodically identified sniper position after sniper position. Her scope revealed the true scope of the trap. At least 15 confirmed enemy shooters positioned in a rough semicircle around the village, with overlapping fields of fire that would make movement in any direction extremely dangerous. The tactical situation was worse than anything she had encountered during her training exercises. The enemy had numbers, position, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The SEAL team had superior training and equipment, but those advantages meant nothing when you were outnumbered 3-1 and caught in the open. Rodriguez. Morrison's voice carried a new note of urgency. How long do we have before our window closes? 90 minutes, sir, came the reply. After that, extraction becomes problematic. Maria knew what that meant in practical terms. The helicopters would be forced to leave without them if they missed their pickup window, leaving the team stranded in hostile territory with limited ammunition and no support. The pressure to move forward was enormous, but charging into the kill zone would accomplish nothing except getting them all killed. That was when she made her decision. Maria had joined the Special Operations community because she believed in accomplishing the impossible, and today's mission seemed designed to test that belief to its absolute limit. If the Taliban fighters wanted to play games with American lives, she would show them that games could be won by either side. Sir, request permission to take an alternate route, Maria said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Morrison turned to look at her with an expression that mixed surprise with grudging respect. What do you have in mind, Santos? Maria pointed to a series of rocky outcroppings that ran parallel to their current position, but offered a different angle of approach to the village. I can work my way around to their flank while the team maintains position here. Draw their attention, maybe take out a few of their shooters, and create an opening for the primary mission. The silence that followed her suggestion was broken only by the distant sound of voices from the enemy positions. Maria could hear the Taliban fighters growing more animated as they discussed their plans for the trapped Americans, their confidence apparently growing with each passing minute. Negative, Santos, Morrison said finally. Too risky. We stick together and find another way. But Maria was already studying the terrain with new eyes, calculating angles and distances with the precision that had made her one of the Navy's top marksmen. The enemy snipers had positioned themselves perfectly to control the obvious approaches to the village, but they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that the Americans would take the obvious approaches. Sir, she said quietly, with respect, there is no other way. They've got us boxed in, and they know it. Our only chance is to change the rules of engagement before they spring their trap. Morrison followed her gaze toward the alternate route, his tactical mind clearly working through the implications of what she was suggesting. Maria could see the conflict in his expression as he weighed the risks of splitting his force against the certainty of disaster if they continued on their current course. The radio crackled with another transmission from command, this one carrying an edge of impatience that made it clear that higher authority was growing concerned about the mission timeline. Morrison's jaw tightened as he acknowledged the transmission, his response carefully neutral despite what Maria suspected were his true feelings about the pressure from above. How confident are you in that route, Santos? He asked finally. Maria took one more careful look through her scope, tracing the path she would need to take and identifying the positions she could reach without exposing herself to enemy fire. The plan was dangerous, but it was the kind of calculated risk that special operations missions were built around. Very confident, sir, she replied, and meant it. Against direct orders, Maria began her movement at 0830 hours. Morrison had been clear in his refusal to authorize her flanking maneuver, but the sound of increasing chatter from the enemy positions told her that waiting any longer would only make their situation worse. The Taliban snipers were growing bolder, and she could hear them discussing the best way to coordinate their opening shots to maximize casualties. She slipped away from the team's position during a moment when Morrison was focused on coordinating with command, using a shallow depression in the rocky ground to mask her movement. Her rifle, ammunition, and emergency supplies added 30 pounds to her body weight. But years of conditioning had prepared her for exactly this kind of physical challenge. The alternate route she had identified required her to climb nearly vertical rock faces in some places, using natural handholds and crevices that would barely support her weight. Each movement had to be calculated and deliberate, because a single loose rock or careless footstep would alert the enemy snipers to her presence and doom both her solo mission and the main team's chances of survival. 40 minutes into her climb, Maria reached the first position where she could get a clear line of sight on one of the enemy sniper nests. Through her scope, she could see a Taliban fighter positioned behind a carefully constructed wall of stones, his attention focused on the area where Morrison's team was concealed. The enemy sniper was so confident in his tactical superiority that he wasn't even scanning for threats from other directions. Maria's first shot came at 0912 hours. The suppressed crack of her rifle lost in the ambient noise of wind moving through the mountain rocks. The Taliban sniper dropped without a sound, his weapon clattering against the stones as his body went limp. Through her scope, Maria could see the confusion on the faces of enemy fighters in adjacent positions as they tried to understand what had happened to their comrade. The second target was more challenging, positioned nearly 400 meters away in a nest that had been carved directly into the face of a cliff. Maria had to adjust her position twice before she found an angle that gave her a clear shot, and the range required her to compensate for wind conditions that were constantly shifting in the mountain environment. Her second shot dropped the Taliban fighter before he could raise an alarm, but Maria could see that the enemy positions were beginning to communicate with each other more urgently. They had noticed that something was wrong, even if they hadn't yet identified the source of the problem. The third sniper was the most dangerous target yet, positioned where he could observe both the main team's location and the route that Maria was using for her flanking maneuver. If he spotted her, the entire mission would collapse in a matter of seconds. Maria spent 15 minutes working her way into position, using every piece of available cover to mask her approach. When she finally had her shot, the Taliban fighter was in the middle of scanning the rocks where she was hidden. Maria could see his eyes through her scope as she squeezed the trigger, and she watched the light go out of them as her bullet found its mark. The enemy sniper fell backward into his position, his rifle sliding down the rocky slope behind him. By 0945 hours, Maria had eliminated 4 enemy snipers and was working her way toward a cluster of positions that controlled the main approach to the village. The Taliban fighters were definitely aware that something was happening now, but they hadn't yet figured out that a single American sniper was systematically dismantling their carefully prepared ambush. She could hear increasingly frantic radio chatter from the enemy positions as they tried to coordinate a response to a threat they couldn't locate. The confidence and laughter she had heard earlier had been replaced by confusion and growing fear. The Taliban fighters had prepared for a conventional assault by the SEAL team, not a lone wolf attack from an unexpected direction. Maria's fourth shot was the most technically challenging yet, requiring her to engage a target that was partially concealed behind a boulder at a range of nearly 500 meters. The wind conditions were unstable, and she had to wait for nearly 10 minutes before the atmospheric conditions were right for the shot. When the opportunity came, she took it without hesitation, watching through her scope as another enemy sniper disappeared from the battlefield. The fifth target was positioned in what the Taliban fighters probably thought was an impregnable location, a natural cave mouth that offered excellent concealment and multiple escape routes. Maria had to climb to a position that was nearly level with the cave before she could get the angle she needed for a clean shot. The approach required her to expose herself to observation from multiple enemy positions, but her movement had been so unexpected that none of the Taliban fighters were watching for threats from her direction. Her fifth shot echoed off the cliff walls despite the suppressor, and Maria knew that her position was probably compromised. She could hear shouting from multiple enemy locations as the Taliban fighters tried to coordinate a response to what they were probably beginning to understand was a coordinated attack rather than a series of accidents. The sixth target spotted her just as she was lining up her shot, and for a moment that felt like hours, Maria found herself in a sniper duel at 300 meters range. The Taliban fighter was skilled and experienced, but he had made the fatal mistake of becoming predictable in his movement pattern. When he raised his head to take his shot, Maria was already waiting with her crosshairs centered on exactly that spot. Her sixth shot ended the duel before it really began, but Maria knew that her luck was running out. The remaining enemy snipers were now actively hunting for her, and their knowledge of the local terrain gave them significant advantages in that kind of fight. She had maybe 10 minutes before they would coordinate their search effectively enough to trap her in her current position. The seventh and most important target was the Taliban commander who was coordinating the sniper positions from a heavily fortified observation post overlooking the entire valley. Taking him out would create chaos in the enemy ranks and give Morrison's team the opening they needed to complete their mission. But reaching a position where she could engage the commander would require Maria to cross nearly 200 meters of open ground, while under observation from at least 6 enemy positions. It was the kind of movement that tactical manuals described as suicide, but Maria had stopped thinking about tactical manuals the moment she decided to disobey Morrison's direct orders. As she prepared to make her final movement, Maria could hear the sound of helicopters in the distance, growing closer as the extraction window approached. Time was running out for everyone involved, and the next few minutes would determine whether the mission ended in success or disaster. The dash across open ground began at exactly 1,015 hours, with Maria using every piece of battlefield experience she had accumulated during 4 years of special operations training. She moved in short bursts, using natural depressions and rock formations to break up her silhouette against the mountainside. Behind her, she could hear the increasing urgency in the Taliban fighters' voices as they realized that their carefully planned ambush was falling apart. The first 50 meters passed without incident, but Maria knew that her luck wouldn't hold indefinitely. Through her peripheral vision, she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions as the Taliban snipers began firing at shadows and suspected movement. Their discipline was breaking down as the psychological pressure of fighting an invisible enemy took its toll on their tactical coordination. A bullet sparked off the rocks less than 2 meters from her position as she reached the halfway point of her movement, followed by the distant crack of a rifle shot echoing across the valley. The Taliban fighters had spotted something, though Maria wasn't sure if they had actually seen her or were simply shooting at anything that looked suspicious. She froze behind a boulder that was barely large enough to conceal her body, listening to the increasing volume of enemy fire as more Taliban fighters joined the desperate search for the American sniper who was systematically destroying their ambush. Maria could hear at least 8 different weapons firing now, their shots creating a deadly crossfire pattern that made further movement seem impossible. That was when she heard Morrison's voice crackling through her radio, the signal barely audible above the noise of gunfire. "Santos, where the hell are you? We're taking fire from multiple positions and need immediate support." Maria keyed her radio once in acknowledgement, but didn't dare speak. Any sound from her position would draw enemy fire that would end her mission before she could complete it. Instead, she began studying the approach to the Taliban commander's position, looking for a route that would get her close enough for the shot that would change everything. The commander's observation post was built into a natural cave formation that offered excellent protection from direct assault. The Taliban fighter had chosen his position well, with clear fields of observation over the entire valley and multiple escape routes if his position became untenable. Taking him out would require Maria to get within 200 meters and make a shot through a narrow gap between carefully positioned rocks. She resumed her movement during a lull in the enemy fire, covering the remaining distance to her final shooting position in a series of rapid bounds that left her breathless but undetected. The Taliban commander's attention was focused on coordinating the search for the mysterious American sniper, and he had no reason to expect that his target was approaching from directly below his position. Maria's final shooting position was a narrow ledge carved into the cliff face by years of erosion, barely wide enough for her body, and offering no protection except the natural camouflage of shadow and broken rock. She had one clear shot at the Taliban commander, and missing would mean certain death as the enemy fighters triangulated her position from the muzzle flash. Through her scope, she could see the commander clearly for the first time. He was older than she had expected, with gray streaking his beard and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent fighting in these mountains. He was holding a radio to his ear with one hand while gesturing toward various sniper positions with the other, clearly frustrated by his inability to locate the threat that was decimating his carefully prepared ambush. Maria controlled her breathing, settling her crosshairs on center mass of the Taliban commander's torso. The range was 180 meters, well within her effective engagement distance, but the angle was steep and the wind conditions were constantly shifting. She would have one chance to make the shot, and missing would doom both her solo mission and Morrison's team. The shot came at 1,027 hours, the crack of her rifle echoing off the canyon walls as the bullet found its target. Through her scope, Maria watched the Taliban commander fall backward into his position, the radio flying from his hand as his body went limp. Almost immediately, the coordinated enemy fire began to slacken as individual sniper positions lost communication with their central command. But Maria's position was now completely compromised. The muzzle flash from her rifle had revealed her location to every enemy fighter within visual range, and she could already see Taliban snipers adjusting their aim toward her narrow ledge. She had perhaps 30 seconds before concentrated enemy fire would make her position untenable. Instead of retreating, Maria used those 30 seconds to engage targets of opportunity. Her eighth shot dropped a Taliban fighter who was trying to coordinate the remaining sniper positions. Her ninth shot eliminated another enemy sniper who had gotten a clear line of sight on Morrison's team. Her 10th and final shot before being forced to abandon her position took out a Taliban fighter who was attempting to flank the main SEAL team from the east. The concentrated enemy fire that followed drove Maria from her shooting position, forcing her to begin a desperate descent down the cliff face as bullets sparked off the rocks around her. She could hear the Taliban fighters shouting to each other as they tried to track her movement, but the chaos created by the loss of their commander had broken down their tactical coordination. As she rappelled down a near-vertical section of cliff using her climbing rope, Maria could see Morrison's team beginning their assault on the village below. The elimination of 7 enemy snipers and the Taliban commander had created exactly the opening that the SEAL team needed to complete their mission, but Maria was now trapped on the cliff face with limited ammunition and no clear route to safety. The sound of approaching helicopters was growing louder, indicating that the extraction window was approaching rapidly. Maria had succeeded in creating the tactical situation that Morrison's team needed to complete their mission, but her own survival now depended on reaching the extraction point before the remaining Taliban fighters could coordinate an effective pursuit. The descent continued under increasingly heavy fire, with Maria using every piece of natural cover to mask her movement toward the valley floor. Above her, she could hear the Taliban fighters attempting to organize a pursuit, but the loss of their commander had left them without clear leadership or tactical coordination. As she reached the bottom of the cliff, Maria could see muzzle flashes from the village where Morrison's team was engaged in close-quarters combat, with the Taliban forces protecting their high-value target. The mission was succeeding, but time was running out for everyone involved. The final sprint to the extraction point began with Maria's boots hitting the valley floor at 1,045 hours, just as Morrison's voice crackled through her radio with the words every Special Operations soldier lived to hear, "Package secured." Moving to Extraction Point Alpha, Maria's unauthorized solo mission had worked. The systematic elimination of 7 Taliban snipers and their commander had created the tactical opening that allowed Morrison's team to capture their high-value target and begin their withdrawal from the village. But her own situation remained desperately dangerous, with at least 8 enemy fighters still positioned between her and the planned helicopter pickup zone. She could hear the distinctive sound of rotors approaching from the south as the extraction helicopters moved into position, but the Taliban fighters weren't giving up easily. Despite the loss of their commander, the remaining enemy snipers were attempting to coordinate one final ambush at the extraction point, hoping to bring down at least one American helicopter and salvage something from their failed trap. Maria's route to the extraction point required her to cross nearly 800 meters of broken ground, while under observation from multiple enemy positions. She had 12 rounds remaining in her rifle and 1 spare magazine, enough ammunition for perhaps 3 more precise shots before she would be reduced to her sidearm for close-quarters combat. The first 200 meters passed without incident as Maria used the natural cover of boulders and dry creek beds to mask her movement. The Taliban fighters were focused primarily on Morrison's team, which was moving toward the extraction point from the opposite direction with their captured prisoner. Maria could hear sporadic gunfire from that direction, indicating that the main team was still encountering resistance. At the 400-meter mark, Maria encountered her first direct threat when a Taliban fighter emerged from concealment behind a low stone wall, apparently attempting to flank Morrison's team from an unexpected direction. The enemy fighter spotted her at the same moment she saw him, and for a split second, both combatants froze as they processed the tactical situation. Maria's training gave her the advantage in that crucial moment of recognition. Her rifle was already at the ready position, while the Taliban fighter was still bringing his weapon to bear. Her shot dropped him before he could fire, but the sound of gunfire from her position immediately drew attention from other enemy fighters in the area. Bullets began striking the rocks around her position as Maria resumed her movement toward the extraction point. The remaining Taliban snipers were now aware of her location and were attempting to pin her down while their comrades moved to flank her position. She had perhaps 5 minutes before the enemy fighters could coordinate an effective assault on her location. The sound of helicopter rotors was growing louder as the extraction aircraft approached the pickup zone. But Maria could also hear the distinctive whistle of rocket-propelled grenades being fired at the incoming helicopters. The Taliban fighters were making their final desperate attempt to prevent the American forces from completing their mission. At 1052 hours, Maria reached a position where she could observe the extraction point, a flat area of ground that had been selected because it offered the helicopters enough space to land while providing the ground team with defensible positions. What she saw made her heart sink. 3 Taliban fighters had positioned themselves with RPG launchers in locations where they could engage the helicopters during the most vulnerable part of the extraction process. Without hesitation, Maria began engaging the RPG teams with precision fire. Her 13th shot eliminated the first Taliban fighter just as he was preparing to fire at the lead extraction helicopter. Her 14th shot dropped the second RPG operator before he could acquire a target lock on the aircraft. The third Taliban fighter managed to fire his rocket before Maria could engage him, but her 15th shot ended his threat permanently. The RPG round missed its target, exploding harmlessly in the rocky ground beyond the helicopter landing zone. But the near miss caused the pilot to execute evasive maneuvers that delayed the landing by precious minutes. Maria could see Morrison's team approaching the extraction point from the village, moving tactically while protecting their prisoner, but time was running out for everyone involved. As the helicopters finally touched down in the designated landing zone, Maria found herself pinned down by fire from the last 3 Taliban fighters, positioned in rocks approximately 150 meters from her location. These enemy combatants were the survivors of the original sniper ambush, and they were determined to exact revenge for their fallen comrades. The extraction helicopters couldn't wait indefinitely. Maria could hear the pilots communicating with Morrison over the radio, discussing fuel limitations and the approaching window when they would be forced to depart with or without all team members. The mission had succeeded in its primary objective, but leaving anyone behind was unacceptable to the special operations community. Maria made her decision in that moment, abandoning her concealed position and beginning a direct assault on the Taliban fighters who were preventing her from reaching the extraction point. Her remaining ammunition was limited, but years of close-quarters combat training had prepared her for exactly this kind of situation. The final engagement was brief and decisive. Maria's tactical movement and superior marksmanship training gave her the advantage over Taliban fighters who were skilled but less disciplined in their approach to combat. Her last 3 shots eliminated the remaining threats, clearing the path to the extraction helicopters. She reached the helicopter just as Morrison was loading their prisoner aboard, her arrival coinciding with the pilot's final warnings about fuel limitations and the need for immediate departure. Morrison's expression when he saw her was a mixture of fury at her disobedience and grudging respect for the results she had achieved. "Santos," he said as she collapsed into a seat in the helicopter cabin, "we're going to have a very long conversation when we get back to base." Maria nodded, too exhausted to do anything except check her weapon and ensure that her gear was properly secured for the flight home. Through the helicopter window, she could see the mountain valley falling away below them, the scene of the morning's battle already beginning to fade into the haze of distance, and adrenaline come down. The mission had succeeded beyond all expectations. The high-value target was in custody, no American lives had been lost, and a significant Taliban sniper network had been eliminated. But Maria knew that her unauthorized actions would have consequences that extended far beyond the tactical success of the operation. As the helicopters flew toward the safety of American-controlled airspace, Maria allowed herself a moment of satisfaction at what she had accomplished. 7 Taliban snipers had learned too late that underestimating American resolve was a fatal mistake. The enemy fighters who had joked about having too many snipers in their ambush had discovered that one American sniper with the right motivation could change the course of an entire battle. The debriefing would come later, along with the inevitable questions about military discipline and the proper chain of command. But, for now, Maria was content to know that her fellow warriors were safe, and their mission was complete. Sometimes the most important victories came not from following orders, but from doing what was necessary when orders weren't enough.